Now, I am not a parent and I have zero plans of becoming one. It doesn't mean I have a problem with kids. Matter of fact, I belong firmly to the school of thought espoused by the ever brilliant Christina Yang, whereby I respect children well enough to ensure that they go to people who actually want to be parents. Hence why my plan is to not have any, to my mother's eternal dismay. I mean, who is surprised? She's Nigerian. Birthing babies and leaving a legacy is what we do. But my most recent conversation with her, where I steered clear of any mention of when I would potentially be making her a grandmother, had me thinking about a show I'd laid to rest a while now. Because sure, the early parts of this year were dominated by me finally getting around to seeing Severance season 1 and then following it up with season 2. And quick side note, but Apple TV is killing it with these sci-fi shows. So quick shout out, if you haven't seen Murderbot yet, also on Apple TV, this is the time to correct that with a quickness. And I have a playlist for that too. But as I was saying, although the early parts of this year was dominated by Severance season 2, for me, I stopped having it fill my every waking hour after the season was done airing until a conversation where I felt stripped of my agency, like I was not being listened to and instead being spoken at, made my mind flash to the world of the Innies and what Severance as a show had to teach us about being better parents. Spoiler alert, it's about treating your mini-me's with the dignity owed them by virtue of them existing. Because here is the thing, and I am sure I'm not the first person who has ever made the connection to the fact that we can look at the Innies. Yes, I am referring to Mark S., Eliar, Dylan, Irving. You get the gist. We can look at their inner self as synonymous with children who were brought into being for various reasons, with zero agency allotted to them, all to serve the purpose for which they were birthed from their outer self. A purpose that they never had any idea about prior to when they had the truth revealed to them about their own existence. I mean, like, Regabi criticizes Mark when she wants to help him reverse the severance procedure by telling him that you brought him being Mark, into this world without his permission, based on your own desire for emotional convenience. And this is a statement that applies to all the characters, especially as we get to learn their backstory in the 2 seasons we've gotten so far. Mark undertook the procedure and created his Innie in order to help himself cope with the grief of the loss of Gemma, whereby he gets to compartmentalize his emotions in a way that best help him cope. We can say that that isn't a bad thing necessarily, but as we are aware, the Innies don't get a choice in how they are brought into this world. And so there's a version of him that is stuck with having no knowledge of anything else outside of Lumon until Alti Mark needs him after he learns that Gemma is very much alive and needs to be rescued. The reason why I bring this up is because of the way in which season 2 ended. I saw a lot of think pieces where people were theorizing and analyzing Mark's decision to stay at Lumon and be with Eliar whilst a rescued Gemma tries getting him to escape with her. And whilst, yes, that would most certainly spell disaster, with Alti Mark now bound to the severed floor alongside his inner self. It was the first decision, however, we actually saw Mark take for himself that had nothing to do with the consideration for his outer self and what that self wants or would want. Instead, Mark chooses to stay, and there would be ramifications for that, of course, but it is ramifications that he and outer Mark would have to deal with the latter getting a better understanding of what it feels like to have someone else make decisions wholly for you without you having a say or the power to stop them. Kind of feels like how we as a society treat children, doesn't it? We lay down the rules and the laws and expect them to follow them to get to the life that we hope they get to live at the end, never really taking the moment to ask if that is actually what they want or even caring about that. Instead, we expect them to toe the line and are then shocked when the minute they have the freedom to do otherwise, they rebel in the bid to acquire the agency that had been taken away from them. I found it very satisfying that Innie Mark, back when they were at the Diamond birthing retreat, and he realized that whilst Alti Mark was trying to paint this picture of what would happen after they revealed the truth about Lumen, it was clear that Alti Mark never actually considered what that would mean for Innie Mark. Would he be able to exist outside the severed floor? How would the schematics of them sharing a body go? Who decides who gets what time and with whom? Of course, Halti Mark doesn't consider any of this, hasn't considered any of this, and Innie Mark uses the opportunity, the moment, to flip off the parent who basically, even at a time when he should be begging for his help, came with the demands and the expectation that Innie Mark would give that help without any qualms or hesitation. And I don't know about you, but it just reminds me so much of the parent-child dynamic and this entire premise of, I am doing this for your own good. Which, should the entire scenario be properly broken down, the person who usually has the most to gain is the parent. And then there's Helena Egan and Eliar, who Helena creates for the sake of advancement, of proving herself to her father and her peers, and who is so brutal and dismissive of anything that Helly asks of her, and instead insists that she better stay in the severed floor and behave. I mean, we are meant to read their interaction as that of the parents with a rebellious teenage child whose spirit they keep wanting to break because they want to mold them in a certain way that best serves and suits their own interests and plans, with zero consideration for what that child would want. And of course, Ellie, to gain that attention, is quite prepared to have Helena hung, to prove to her that she might be powerless in other aspects, but they do share a body. And if Innie Ellie dies, Alti Helena would soon follow. But then the thing about controlling an abusive parental relationship like this one is the fact that they are often predicated by an absolute lack of respect for the child's boundaries, which is to be expected if they are operating under the belief that said child exists only to serve the purpose for which they were born. Then they don't see them as their own individual person, and there is zero respect for their autonomy or anything that they have or own. And Helena proves this by hooking up with Innie Mark whilst he thought she was Helly. It's such a clear violation of Ellie's autonomy and boundaries, and is also an assault to Mark. But Helena, Alti Helena, doesn't care because, like some parents who are that narcissistic, selfish, and manipulative, it is about what they want and the absolution that they seek. And I don't think it is an error that this issue is never actually quite addressed. Innie Mark just never sees Helena Egan again. There is no chance or opportunity to confront her. And Ellie never gets that chance either. Instead, they have to deal with the fear that at any point, Helena Egan can intrude whenever she wants. And the thought of that is just despicable. Compare that to Dylan. Now, just like all the other parents, I meant Alties in the story, Altie Dylan also endured the severance process in order to have an Innie version of himself that would be able to go into work, keep said job, and earn money for his family. A version of himself that isn't a screw up like he is. And when we got to his story, my brain immediately went to the parents and parental figures who basically live vicariously through their kids, whereby they force said children to accomplish the goals and dreams that they had but never got around to actually fulfilling. And so their children exist as merely an extension of themselves. And this would have carried on with Dylan, except unlike the other parents, Alties. Unlike the other Alties, with Mark treating his Innie as a distraction and a means to compartmentalize his pain, and Helena, who believes her Innie only exists to serve her purpose, which is for the advancement and recognition that she wants from her father and her peers, Altie Dylan, on the other hand, eventually arrives at a point where he is okay with Innie Dylan following through on what he wants and desires, even though what that ends up being is their wife and a chance to learn more and spend more time with the kids. Of all the Alties we've gotten the chance to meet so far, Altie Dylan is the one who ends up the most well-adjusted of the lot. And I personally think that part of why that is so is because he is very much aware of what it is like to have zero power and control over your life and be made to feel like a failure for circumstances outside of your control, no matter how much and how hard you try. And we see this in the episode where he's trying to get a new job. I'm not bringing up Irving because we don't really get much in terms of interaction between Alti Irving and Innie Irving to know how he thinks of his Innie. Although what we do know is that he is in Lumen for investigative purposes with the aim to take down the organization. But what that entails is something that he keeps Innie Irving in the dark about, which is not a healthy or ideal situation either. I look at Severance and these characters like parents who are navigating their relationship with their Innie kids, and it bowls me over with how stark the show makes that comparison for us to see how depressing and powerless it can make someone feel. And yet society as it exists today doesn't care because we are conditioned to not think of children as actual individual beings, but as mini versions of ourselves who exist for us to play dress up with and force our ideals and ideas onto them. They are meant to be actual individuals who are experiencing the world and coming to their own conclusions and growing and developing and finding their identity as a result of that. And just as with the Innies, I see the show as a cautionary tale of the many ways things can go wrong if, as parents, people don't start doing much better by the children that they call theirs. Of course, this is just me and my thoughts. I would as always love to hear yours. Do you agree with me? Disagree with me? Please drop your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. If you can't, however, do consider checking out my other channels. One is my gaming channel and the other holds my ASMR content. I have both linked in the description bar if they sound like something you might be interested in, whichever the case may be. However, I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.